even compared to just like 10 years ago, I feel like it's way less accepted to even have a conversation with a stranger without it seeming creepy or weird or abnormal. So a lot of men are basically conditioned to think that they should not go be, I don't know, like a traditional masculine energy type individual.
Hello, everybody. You are listening to Chatting with Candice. I'm your host, Candice Horbacz. Before we get into the episode, I'm going to remind you to hit that like and subscribe button if you haven't already. Both of those things help with the algorithm, allegedly, hopefully. I'm pretty sure I'm shadow banned on all social platforms, so those little things help, and I really appreciate it. We are going to do a quick shout out for our cup of coffee this week. I wanted to say a big thank you to Magnus. Thank you for that cup of coffee. If you want to support the podcast, you can go to chattingwithcandice.com and click that link that says buy me a coffee or sign up for our Patreon. All of it goes right back into the podcast, so it helps very, very much. This week, we have Derek from More Plates, More Dates joining the podcast. I am so excited. We have been on this health journey. We've been looking at it from kind of a quantum mindset approach, and I'm really excited to have Derek on to have more tangible, practical, everyday ways to increase our longevity, increase our health, feel better, learn a little bit more about hormones, gut health, whatever else we get into. He has a wildly popular YouTube channel. I'm going to make sure I link everything below. I will also link any affiliates and sponsors of the podcast in the show notes. These are things that I have used, courses I've taken, and things that I support. I'm not going to plug each one directly, but if you want to check them out, they're all linked below, and I'm pretty sure you get a discount on all of them. So just do that. The code will be CWC if one applies. And I think that's it. Let's hop into the episode. Please help me welcome Derek. Derek, thank you so much for joining the podcast. I'm really excited to have you on today.
No, thanks for having me.
Yeah, I've been going through like my own health journey recently, and I've been kind of attacking it from more of a like quantum mindset, Joe Dispenza kind of level. So having you on feels very balanced and more like practical, actionable items that people can kind of do to take charge of their bodies, their minds, and their longevity.
No, right on. I'm hoping I can provide some value. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sure you're gonna have a ton. I was in this like really deep rabbit hole just trying to look at a whole bunch of your content. And one of my favorite places was TikTok because the interesting thing, at least for me and my algorithm, is you don't come up almost at all. It's all of these younger men that are kind of pretending to be you. So you're like your traps and your shoulders are kind of iconic on TikTok.
Yeah, no, it's that's a platform that is very interesting what pops off there, and I have not it's definitely not my go-to platform, but there is yeah, I guess there's some fan accounts and whatnot there.
Yeah, it's really great. I enjoyed it. I was laughing. I was watching one of your podcasts and I thought it was interesting because I saw it on a couple of different men's health clips. And something as like a woman I have no idea about or knew the significance was like morning wood. So waking up with a boner and like what is the health significance? What story does that tell and why is it important?
I would say in general, it's probably a good proxy for hormone status in general. So for men, you know, when you're a teenager and you first go through puberty, a lot are familiar with this. And then they notice as they get older, it starts to, I guess, because it's such a gradual thing. It's not like overnight, it just stops happening. They just, years later, some individuals notice, oh, wow, I don't even remember the last time I had this. And oftentimes it can be one of the, like, I wouldn't determine a person's hormone status like, oh, you're clearly low T if you don't have morning wood. I would not say that, but it's certainly one of the proxies for, oh, maybe you should check on, do you have other symptoms that are related to hormone dysfunction, and have you had a blood test to kind of assess where you're at? Because it is kind of odd if you don't have any other underlying like psychological issues necessarily. Like some individuals who are excessive masturbators or excessive porn watchers, like maybe it might be more typical to not have morning wood because they're just abusing their like dopamine circuitry so dramatically. But for people with just, you know, normal average people, if they are noticing that it hasn't happened in months or even weeks realistically, it would be worthwhile to kind of see where things are at under the hood, because it could be a reflection of low testosterone or an imbalance.
Does it have anything to do with like hip health as well, as far as circulation goes? Because I think that's something I also saw.
Yeah, like circulation issues. If you are somebody who, like, having erectile quality can be dictated by actual circulatory health too, for sure. In general, I guess maybe my demo is more leaning towards the younger to middle-aged male, so I don't necessarily find guys having erectile issues as much from circulatory issues, but that definitely can be, I wouldn't say for certain that you should write it off as that, but it could be a factor, certainly. And that would be one of the things that you would try and deduce as you kind of go down the laundry list of, is it a hormone issue? Is it a, like, what's my blood pressure like? Is it a circulation issue, etc.? Yeah.
So you mentioned dopamine abuse. So what is the difference between the dopamine that you get from eating, the dopamine that you get from orgasm, and obviously like there is a difference neurologically versus when you masturbate versus when you climax with someone else. Like it triggers different parts of the brain, so they are different. And then dopamine that you get, which is supposed to be really intense from a cold plunge, like it's something like a 4-hour spike you're supposed to get.
The spike in adrenergic signaling, which is like your adrenaline fight or flight system, is dramatic, where you could have, I'm sure if you've ever done it, you know how intense it is. And the spike in norepinephrine is pretty significant from it, where it is comparable to, certain drugs of that nature. But I would say that to delineate between like the dopamine that you get from food versus, I don't know, like synthetic induced activities like masturbation to porn or whatnot, it's kind of like you're just acclimating your body to certain different kinds of stimulatory input to achieve that neurotransmitter release, which is can be problematic or not problematic depending on what activities are tied to that, like reward signaling. So like when you have somebody who is pleasure eating or
Mhm.
masturbating to achieve a very, very easy dopamine hit, like I would say in general, those people are potentially reinforcing bad eating habits, or on the opposite side of the spectrum, reinforcing bad, I don't know, like low effort,
Like
even
coping
like,
mechanism kind of?
yeah, but also reinforcing what is likely to be a lower quality dating life, I would say, because it's significantly inhibiting your drive to actually go meet a partner and probably impeding your quality of sex too, even when you have a partner with you. Obviously, there is like a balancing act with this. It's not to say
Mhm.
that no one can masturbate or watch porn, but if it's to excess, oftentimes that's where you get people getting into obesity territory, or people getting into, you know, dysfunctional relationships, or people who are just homebodies and essentially become hermits. And there's a lot of people that are just complacently living their lives in their homes and are, haven't had sexual activity in years. And it's a ever growing proportion of young men, especially.
Yeah, I was reading something and it was saying that the average age of, a male virgin in Japan was, like, 30 or 31.
Oh my God. Wow.
And then
It,
they're facing a population decline, which is
mhm.
now you under like, that's one of the contributing factors. So what do you feel like what is the driver of this complacency or almost like this social anxiety to connect or this aversion to connect? Because I agree with you. I think you can do most things in moderation and everything, like the difference between a tonic and a toxin is the dosage, right? So it's
Mhm.
not to say don't partake in any of these things, but if you're doing it as a way to escape, then that's a problem. So, like, what is the driving factor, especially for young men, when it comes to like these kind of self-sabotaging behaviors?
Like similar to the dopamine circuitry discussion that we just had, I think it is the ease of access of achieving some of these things is so, the barrier to entry and ease of access is so low that if you can achieve a successful outcome, like neurotransmitter release that you deem to be like achieves a set point of I no longer care and I'm complete, I'm satisfied. I feel like that definitely reinforces the complacent, sedentary behaviors of individuals that kind of just float through life and really don't have to go put themselves through hardship or make high levels of effort into certain activities to achieve those same outcomes that actually, give that signal to your brain. So there's probably more that goes into it. I'm not like a neuro science expert by any means, but it's certainly becoming dramatically more problematic as the years go on. And I feel like the technology and the social media and all that definitely exacerbates it. And I don't think it can be overlooked just how, I don't know, it's the ease of access. It's just like it's too accessible for everyone overall, to a point where I think the proportion of men who will actually put in the effort to achieve the outcomes they desire is just lower and lower, and more people are becoming okay with, you know, underachieving in many areas of their life if they're able to, get the outcome through a lower effort means.
Mm-hmm. No, yeah, I would agree with that. I would agree that it is like this really quick, tangible way to feel like you've accomplished something. Like it's a very quick release, and then there is obviously a way to measure that. So you're like, okay,
Mhm.
I did do something today, even though it's like that's not something that should be really counted as moving forward with any area of your life. But I would say that I also feel like there's almost this weird space that a lot of young men are in where it's trying to find purpose, and it's where am I even wanted, or where can I excel, or where is like my space to run, because I feel that whole feminist movement took a lot of space away from men, and like a lot of the traditional roles that they had, which was provider and protector, were saying like we don't need anymore. So it's almost like, well, what are they left to do? Like, where is the space for them to achieve or build without that getting demonized?
Yeah, yeah. And I think just nowadays, with how socially divided so many groups are and whatnot, and I don't know how much, the social distancing and all the stuff played into it. I don't know how much we want to get into that, but in
I'll go
general,
as deep as you want to go.
in general, I feel like it's even compared to just like 10 years ago, I feel like it's way less accepted to even have a conversation with a stranger without it seeming creepy or weird or abnormal. So a lot of men are basically conditioned to think that they should not go be, I don't know, like traditional masculine energy type individual. It was like a bad way to phrase it, but somebody who could otherwise just strike up a conversation with a stranger or a woman and try and even engage in any sort of intellectual discourse whatsoever. Like, they are just incentivized to stay home and not be creepy, because that's like, the best you can do is just do nothing, because you might, you know, do something creepy, and that's the worst thing ever, right? But at the same time, when you're online, there's such a dramatic disparity between, high value men online and who's rich and successful versus, oh, I'm just this random guy with a normal job who's sitting at home most of the time. No woman would want me. And then I think it was like a statistic of, it was like 10% get 90% of the women or something. And that
Wow.
was 10 plus years ago. So now I imagine it's even worse. So, or, something re- proportionally, there is definitely a not proportional spread of, one man for one woman. It is very much like a lot of men are stuck in basically a rut of trying to achieve a level of, I don't know, just feeling okay with their lives, even though they are not necessarily happy with where they stand.
Mhm. Yeah,
Yeah.
one of my girlfriends was out getting coffee, and a gentleman, a very nice young man, went up to her and just like tried to introduce himself to just create that like moment of connection and ask her out. And she was just like, it was the creepiest thing. Meanwhile, she has these strangers that are on social media going into her DMs, and she thinks that's fine. I was like, what about that is creepy? If you're not interested or you don't feel anything, then you can say no. And then it can get creepy if there's like a boundary being crossed. But an initial, like just initiating, I think is fine. And what I try to explain to my girlfriends that are on these dating apps and they're just doing like, you have to be at least 6 foot, you have to look successful, like all of these like very superficial parameters. Like when you're doing that and not meeting someone in person, you're not accounting for like pheromone exchange and like what your body is telling you. Like, is this a proper match or not? Because there might be somebody that you would online see, like, that's not the guy for me. But when you're in front of him, like there is that connection because we don't really know what drives attraction. There's a huge X factor in that.
How many of them have a 6 foot cutoff, out of curiosity?
Oh, all of my girlfriends.
Oh, really?
Like, everybody. Yeah, even, like, the
Wow.
short ones. And I'm like, "That doesn't even make sense. You're 5 foot. Why do you need a
Yeah.
6-foot guy? That doesn't even make
But
sense."
do they even know how to perceive what is 6 feet is the thing?
Probably
Because
not.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of them say that, but then when they're if a 5'3" girl is standing beside a guy who's 5'10.5", she's like, "Oh, he could
But
say he's yeah,
you'll see guys that are it's like poor guys. They're honest on these apps. So they'll say 5'11" or 5'10", and I kid you not, I have had my girlfriend say, "But he's only 5'10". But he's only
mm,
5'11". I'm like, "That's 1 inch. What are you
yeah,
talking? This could be the love of your life, and you're not gonna go meet him over 1 inch." So I think men, if you're listening, just put 6 foot because women don't know what they
yeah."
want.
Do the apps force you to put a height now, or is it just in their bio they proactively put it to try and
I don't know if
distinguish
they
themselves
force
from
it.
the?
Yeah, it might
Okay.
be just, like, listed and the guys just think that they might have to answer it. I could be wrong. I haven't been on one of those in a long
Yeah.
time, but
Like, it's a good idea if you are 6 feet to put in your bio, but I mean, if I wasn't sure if that was, like, a mandatory input now.
oh, maybe it is, who knows?
That'd be intense. Have you seen those, limb lengthening surgeries?
Oh my god, I
Yeah.
saw a video and I wish that there was a disclaimer, but it's just auto played, and it was this guy going through recovery, and he had these brackets, and you saw the scars and the bolts, and I'm for what? What do you like, do you know how many inches you can gain from that?
Quite a bit, actually. I was,
Really?
shocked myself. Yeah, these individuals, they go, get these, screws put into their I have to look into it more, but it's more they basically, like, micro adjust their bones by the day until they have gained upwards of like, you can go however far you want, and the extent of your recovery and rehabilitation capacity is obviously hindered the more you go. But I've seen one guy that I saw that I might make a video on because this is crazy. He's a bodybuilder and he was 6 feet when he went in, and he got increased to 6'6". And it's like,
Oh
what are you
my
doing? Yeah,
why?
I don't know. Just wants to be 6'6", as tall as possible, I guess. But
So is that strictly below the knee, or are they going above the knee as well?
I think it depends on the situation, but I have to look into it more. But yeah, I think there's a choice between if you do both or not, and it depends on how many inches you want, or
Mhm.
perhaps like I don't know your proportions or something. I think it kind of depends, but yeah, it's kind of sketchy because I've seen these people trying to walk after, and maybe I just haven't followed it enough to see somebody who's successfully athletic afterwards. But the current people that have kind of popped off on social media from the virality of it all, they're just like hobbling around at best case scenario, seemingly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and then I guarantee your ability to walk is gonna be more important than your height, and then if you're doing it disproportionately, which maybe they're not, but it seems like there could be a lot of mistakes that could happen. Like, we all have different, like, skeletal structures, so
Mhm.
by making that change there's gonna be, like, a second and third order consequence, you would imagine, like, on your hips and your back and your shoulders, and I used to ride horses, and we had, like, this saddle master, like, the guy is just, like, a human engineer. Like, he sees people like parts and he can tell you your body type and where he thinks it originated from and like the advantages and disadvantages of it and how you balance all of that, and he takes all of that into account when he's making a saddle for you. So it's like if you were like he would even talk about your shin length in comparison to your torso and what that meant. And I just think back to him, and if you were to just make those small adjustments, he would even talk about girls that are getting like their butts done or their boobs done. And he's like, that has a huge effect down the line because your frame is not meant for those things. Like, that's a certain type of body type with girls that are built that way. So I'd imagine that chopping your legs up like that is not going to be good for you down the road.
No, it looks like they have to like relearn how to walk essentially. Like, it's not even just that their legs are messed up, they also their movement patterns and their muscle memory for how they even take each step. It looks like they're, a toddler again essentially, which is nuts.
So with your audience, do you tackle like the mental side of that for men? Like, obviously you work on your body and like that's a huge part of your content is like pushing out nutrition and workouts, but do you also work on mindset when it comes to like there's a difference between feeling love for yourself and like self-worth and then like being a narcissist, right? Like those are two different
Mhm.
things. So like being fulfilled but not complacent, or being fulfilled and not a narcissist. So like that healthy balance of like I'm okay and I don't need to like take testosterone when I'm 15 years old because I want to be big, or chop up my legs because I want to be tall, but just like a real love for who your essence is.
Yeah, I wouldn't say my content is heavily into that, but I do try and highlight like even the realities of like the 6 foot cutoff. I've made videos where oftentimes women who say they have this bullet point list of things that they will not accept anything but minimum this, if you are a charismatic, I don't know, relatable to that individual and they really, I don't know, resonate with your energy and they just really like you, like you can get away with a lot of stuff that on paper you were not qualified for. So I
Mm-hmm.
often highly encourage guys to just max themselves out in as many categories as possible. Oftentimes, guys in the gym, especially, they will lean into the whole steroid, roid themselves out and get as jacked as possible, but then neglect social communication skills, like just normal things that could otherwise set you apart and just make you a, I don't know, person that people even want to be friends with too. And they will neglect basic hygiene, dressing well, building high quality relationships, friend groups, and all in pursuit of this like next level physique that they think is the key to getting top tier women silver platter to them essentially, and then they find out often that it isn't the case that happens, so they need to develop in other areas. And I think the sooner people realize that, the better, because you don't, like, everyone knows a guy who's short that's got some very attractive woman, and you might
Jason
wonder,
Statham.
yeah, it's like, how did that guy get fill in the blank person? He's bald, he's shorter, he's whatever. And there's always, exceptions. And I wouldn't even say it's an exception to the rule. Like, it's not like they're so rare that it's like a unicorn scenario where it's only a Jason Statham who's super successful and rich. Like, oftentimes, as long as you are maxing yourself out in as many categories as you can, you're giving less reasons to be disqualified from the opposite sex, and still be an attractive human, even if you're 5'7" or something. Like, it's not going to play in your favor, obviously, but all the other things cumulatively can definitely help you. And I think the sooner people, I don't know, really embrace that and mentally accept that, their value doesn't derive just down to them hitting a 6 foot cutoff or something, the sooner they can be happy and try and get into a relationship with somebody who accepts them for them as a whole, but also, trying to strive for greatness in as many areas as possible, ideally.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Do you think that fitness is just a really good entry point for a lot of people? Like it's kind of the least complex or complicated or scary. It's just like developing certain disciplines and habits, and then you can take those lessons out into dating and into friendship and into business.
Yeah, I think it bleeds into a lot of areas of life, because once you get healthy with your body, not only do you look more physically attractive, but in addition, your mental well-being, similar to the mental health, increases substantially too. Like, there's absolutely a relationship between emotional well-being, mood stability, etc., and having a good body composition. And then by extension of that, you look better in clothes, you're more confident, which can impart even, I don't know, further development of your social skills, because you're more confident to actually go out in the world and talk to other people and whatnot. So, it hits so many boxes, and it's such a controllable variable that everyone can really change in a quick period of time too. Like, it doesn't take that long to, well, it depends, how out of shape you are, of course, but I mean, like, it's
Mhm.
not like it's the most complicated thing in the world. Whereas, I don't know, maybe becoming incredibly skilled with communicating with women might seem like the most daunting task ever. Whereas with fitness, it's like, eat your protein, go to the gym and lift stuff and sleep. It's just like, it's not that hard if you're tracking everything. If you're just doing it blindly and don't actually know where to go with it, then yeah, it could be daunting as well. But a lot of people have the low hanging fruit, absolutely, of their fitness that could correct many areas of their life, I feel like, or at least enhance their ability to then achieve greatness in other areas of life by that. And the discipline to actually, complete a crazy body transformation or whatever, if you can discipline yourself to restrict calories, get over bad eating habits, go to the gym regularly, impose significant amounts of stress on your body, etc., like, really, you can do a lot of other things that maybe otherwise seem daunting at the time, but are, comparatively so not as bad, I would say. So
Yeah, like making you less reactive to everyday stressors.
yeah, I think stress resilience definitely goes up via lifting too. And even like the hormonal implications of getting a better body composition and getting a more hormonally supportive state to tolerating stress. Like that's absolutely a thing as well.
So I love that we like kind of went through kind of like the sacrifices and discipline that you have to do in order to achieve a certain body composition. So you see we I guess it's a human thing. We like to make things like easy and we like to cheat and we want to get things, fast and the least resistance. So you see everyone that's going bananas over this Ozempic drug and whatever all the other things are. And then recently they're now saying they want to give it to kids. So got it approved at high dose for 12 and up. And I was like, I had to look this stuff up today because it was so alarming. But childhood obesity is up to almost 20%, which is about 15 million kids. The crazy part is of that 20%, 12.7 are 2 to 5 years old, which
Jeez.
breaks my heart because I have a 3.5-year-old and I don't think he could eat enough food to get even chubby. Like this kid is just always running and jumping and playing and he eats and he's like a regular healthy body mass for his age. So when you see that, and you're like, how can 2 to 5-year-olds be obese at that level? And then instead of looking at all of the reasons that that kid is obese, and we're not just saying just like chubby, like clinically obese, we're saying let's just give them this drug. And to me, I think that's crazy because you're not correcting the bad behaviors or the bad environment that's leading to that. Because I think, to my understanding, obesity, it's not really genetic. Like it's a really small percentage of people that is a real contributing factor. And I don't know if that's correct or incorrect.
There are some genetically inherited traits for sure, and especially from a satiety brain chemistry aspect, I do think the epigenetics of like your parents, their habits can actually, like for example, if the mother is has exceptionally bad eating habits and she's morbidly obese, it's more likely that the child will also inherit that, which can make it a taller, I don't know, task for them to overcome, especially when they don't have the guidance from their parents to actually teach them how to fix things because obviously they didn't, do it themselves. So, however, that's not to say that people couldn't, fix their stuff. I don't know anyone really like there are people who exist obviously who have dramatic, hormone deficiencies and whatnot who will never be able to get in shape unless they correct that via medical interventions. But
Mhm.
that's, the severe minority, of course. The majority of people who have good eating habits can and exercise activity, blah blah blah, can definitely maintain good shape without having to go on a appetite crushing drug for sure. So I think a lot of people, the first step is to just stop buying the stuff that is pushing them over. Like I guess to the most granular level, people just need to figure out how to track first of all, which is hard to tell a child, of course, because if they have a parent who is not in the know of how to get in shape and they let their child eat, to excess of highly palatable, processed foods and whatnot, then you can see how they end up in this position, especially with the more increasingly sedentary lifestyles, even in children, I imagine now too, with, the video games and the social media, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, it's tough because it's like some of these kids, if you don't correct the underlying issue, they will not get in shape. But it's like, how do you impart that knowledge at scale when you have parents who don't know it themselves and clearly aren't adopting it and bringing it into their own lives? So I sort of get where in certain scenarios it could make sense, but I also, definitely would be concerned about the consequences of some child being reliant on a drug to maintain their appetite with unforeseen consequences for, the future. Cause we also don't know what's going to happen 20 years from now from a kid who's been on semaglutide for this entire time. Who knows what's going to happen? Like there are, certain side effects that go not really spoken about prominently. So yeah, like I think a lot of people at the end of the day, you could definitely correct things if you were to fix the underlying issue. It's just a matter of how do you do that at scale? It's just difficult.
Yeah, the doctor in the article was saying that it's a lifelong medication, and the moment that you stop taking it, the weight comes back on, and then the side effects that I've heard about are loss in like 30% in like in lean muscle mass and bone density. So if you're giving it to a kid pre-puberty, so 12 is usually pre-puberty for most kids, and you're talking about something that affects bone health, that seems detrimental or possibly detrimental.
A lot of people conflate the appetite suppressing properties with it literally does this, which it's an indirect consequence. So by inhibiting your appetite, you are eating less. And by extension of that, you will lose weight and could be bone mass if you're severely depriving yourself of nutrition while you're in your growing years, especially. For individuals to say, oh, you'll gain it all back. Like basically what would happen is your body would then return to the environment that previously you were incapable of achieving, the body composition that was good because your habits were not, you know, representative of a healthy eating pattern. So it's not necessarily that taking the drug out makes you fat. It's more that now you don't have the appetite suppressing qualities of it. And now your appetite's back to baseline and you have not changed the type of foods that you're eating. So now you are eating higher quantities of them again. And that restores your weight back in, relatively short order because you didn't correct the underlying problem. So yeah, like ultimately at the end of the day, it is sort of like a band-aid for like a really bad bleeding cut or something. Like you are trying to just like cover up the issue by lowering your food intake of what are otherwise not good quality foods typically. And that's where you get the, lean body mass losses or bone loss in some cases. Individuals who are already eating a diet that is disproportionately low in protein. And now, if my appetite's even lower and I already kind of prefer highly palatable foods that are not necessarily nutrient dense, what am I probably going to be reaching for to hit my lower calorie amounts? It's going to be the highly palatable foods and proportionally lesser so, the healthy ones. So it could kind of exacerbate unhealthy eating patterns and you could lose weight, but you are still like eating the same bad choices. It's just like to a lesser amount, or without the drug, you eat a higher amount of the bad food. So, and that's not always the case, though. Like, it definitely helps a lot of people, but I would be very hesitant to give it to a child.
I was
For
gonna say,
sure.
yeah, because if you're giving it to a 12-year-old who's primarily eating like butter noodles and toast, and then all of
Yeah,
a sudden they're eating, almost the same as if they had stomach surgery. So they're still
yeah.
eating that shitty food, and now they're getting even less of the minimal nutrients that are in that. It just seems like there's gonna be a consequence when it goes to like those really big growth spurts that they're about to
Oh,
hit.
yeah, like inhibited height outcomes,
Right.
inhibited muscle and bone growth. Yeah, I would be very concerned about that.
Yeah, and then it's like, well, why aren't the doctors talking about nutrition? And this is one of the biggest criticisms I see anytime like your content goes around or on clips. It's like, is he a doctor? I was like,
Uh,
that is a bonus for me. I have fired so many doctors in my life on my
yeah.
path because I have a couple autoimmune issues that I was working with, and I was talking. First of all, none of them even talk about nutrition. They say that there's not enough evidence for them to give me any nutritional advice. That's what they say. There's no evidence that the food that you eat affects your health, which to me is astonishing. And then my one specialist was like, well, it's obvious what you do. You just have to cut out meat. And I was like,
Uh,
why is that
yeah.
obvious? That's Harvard is actually saying quite the opposite, that if you have autoimmune disorders, that you should be upping your red meat intake. But here's my doctor who has an MD, who is a specialist, that's like, oh no, you actually should be vegetarian. I'm like, this is nonsense. This is nonsense. So I actually think it works in your favor, at least for me. Um,
Yeah, I definitely think it gives me the flexibility, at least, to speak from not a position of authority. Because one thing I do see online that like, it depends on the person, obviously, but sometimes you'll see a chiropractor or something who's like on YouTube parading around as a doctor and then gives like the most obscenely biased advice ever. And he's like, this is the only way to do this. And, I'm a doctor, so listen to me. And, there needs to be an objective kind of self education, unfortunately, nowadays, seemingly, where even if a very prominent authority in the space says something, you still need to fact check it because even in the online space now, there's doctors that are arguing with each other every day. Like, it's insane.
mhm.
So it's like you don't even know what to believe anymore at this point, unfortunately, which sucks that there is not unbiased sources of information very commonly. Like, it's very difficult to discern what is the truth versus not, and people are very apt to dramatize things to kind of, you know, very I don't know, highlight the importance of their niche or services they offer or products they sell. And it's tough because the average consumer or viewer really has to get honestly has to self-educate themselves, is how I feel nowadays. Like, especially with the autoimmune stuff, like, good luck figuring out if you have an autoimmune issue without digging into it yourself. You would never have a doctor come out, or a typical doctor come out, and tell you that what you're eating could be triggering an autoimmune reaction or anything of that nature.
No, no, they absolutely don't. My whole experience, the weird thing too, so I have Graves' disease, and usually that's genetic, but no one in my family that I know of has it. And I was maybe like 23 when it kind of like clicked on. And I immediately started losing a ton. When I say a ton of weight, I mean a ton of weight. I eventually got down to 90 pounds and I was eating like a horse. Like I couldn't eat
Mhm.
enough and I couldn't even sit up anymore because my resting heart rate was over 200. And
Jeez.
yeah, I'd almost faint just sitting up. And I eventually couldn't walk anymore because my muscles started to atrophy. And I'm going to the doctor. And this lady is like, well, I went to Chapel Hill, so I'm a
Mhm.
great doctor. And I'm telling you that you're just stressed. And then I went back and she's like, it might be mono, wasn't mono. You're probably just dehydrated. I'm like, I'm not fucking dehydrated. Like
Yeah.
I'm dying. So I go
Imagine
into this.
going in with like flu-like temperatures and a resting heart rate above even 100 and being told like you're probably fine. It's just nonsense.
Nonsense, but she had an
Yeah.
MD and she went to, like, this fancy school, so I was just this dumb kid and she had no like, you know what I mean, listen to her. I ended up going to a walk-in clinic that's, like, super janky and dirty and filled with questionable people, and I'm like, "I really think I'm gonna die, I don't know what's happening," and he rushed me to the hospital. He's like, "I'm pretty sure you have Graves' disease, we need to put you on this cardiac machine to make sure that, you know, your heart doesn't stop," and then I simply got like, a pill, and then all of a sudden my thyroid started to, like, not it started to slow down and like quite literally saved my life. But this lady was just so attached to her identity of a doctor and a prestigious doctor that she couldn't even fathom that like me, a regular person, was suggesting that she was wrong could be a possibility.
Yeah, that's nuts. For it's interesting because most I've encountered a lot of women who have dealt with Hashimoto's thyroiditis, but
Mhm.
not as many who have had Graves. Did you find out, like, do you take a medication that suppresses TSH, or it suppresses like your signaling to produce T4, or what is like the thing you have to take to control it? Or is it
So
corrected by diet now?
no, so interestingly, I was on methimazole for a really long time and that just like slowed
Mhm.
down the production, I think, of T3 or T4. I don't know.
T4 would be the more
T4.
inactive that converts to T3, so I would assume T4, but, like,
Yeah, so it essentially slowed it down to a point where that made sense, and then I had my second baby, and then my thyroid was going crazy, and I told them the whole pregnancy, and this goes back to my issues with doctors and, like, why I've fired so many. I told them while I was pregnant, I don't feel right, like, this is my second pregnancy, I feel sluggish, I feel almost like depressed wasn't the right word, but just, like, dull, like nothing, like I just didn't feel alive. They were checking my blood, but they said it was all within the healthy parameters. I have my second baby, and then all of a sudden I found like this incredible like private practice doctor and she's like, "I think it flipped and like you just aren't making thyroid hormone anymore." So she did these really in-depth tests that I had never done in like my decade of being sick. She took me off the medication. I haven't been on it for like 4 or 5 months now, and my thyroid is like slowly evening out just through like stress mitigation. I'm like super into Dispenza, so like mindset, right? Like kind of controlling negative thoughts and your stress and your space and like healing on like a woo quantum level, but also diet,
mm,
right? Like cleaning up your diet and forcing yourself to move. I got in a place where I was like so just like I just gave up, no energy. I had the baby weight. I was like, my thyroid's not fucking working. And just like this woe is me mentality. And eventually I was just like, I had to beat myself up about it. I'm like, you were a piece of shit and you're never going to lose this weight. Like, just move. You already feel like trash. You have the workout stuff right in the next room. Like, just do it. Like, stop being a bitch. So that
mm.
was my way of doing it. And I started moving and everything started to kind of heal. And I feel a million times better. But it's like whatever modality works for you. If you have to like be a bully and like kind of like beat yourself to up to go, fucking go. Or if you can do it in a loving way, do it that way, but don't just settle for not feeling good.
Hmm. Do you have blood work now to oversee the thyroid function, or how do you kinda, like, keep an eye on it other than general sense of, feeling not over the top, cranked heart rate, etc.
Yeah, I check it like every 2 or 3 months, and it's still
Okay.
on the low end, and I haven't been on medicine, so I've had it checked twice now since I've been off, and it's still low, and, I definitely don't feel hyper, because when I feel hyper, it's real I get really hot and wired and agitated. I start getting, like, palpitations or some tremors that'll start showing up, so none of that's happening, and then if I would, then I would go get a panel, but again, it's like most of the doctors that run panels, it's like, what are you even looking for? You're not even checking for all of the right things. Like you're taking like this super small and like vague snapshot that doesn't tell you anything that's actually happening.
Yeah, even diagnosing thyroid issues, it's like oftentimes they use very I don't know, like especially in Canada where I am, they use very preliminary screening tactics to assess where your status is at. Like they'll look at your TSH and then nothing else. And only if your TSH is like cranked over 5 will they actually look at your T4. And then your T4 has to be crashed into nothingness to even look at your T3. And it's like mind blowing because you could have like a conversion issue to reverse T3 and just be like, still, even on paper, short of not looking at the reverse T3, you could have a normal looking thyroid panel, but be super hypo just because none of it is actually, getting activating the receptor. So
Mm.
it's crazy how granular you have to get almost on self-education these days, but especially for like unique health issues. But at the same time, I guess it's difficult to expect general like family doctors to know everything like a specialist would, like an endo or urologist or whatever. But the way that they approach it oftentimes I feel like is from a position of I know the answer. I just like don't want to tell you it, or I already know it, and you're just like making stuff up in your head, which is problematic. And is kind of what inspired me to start Marek Health, which is where I kind of get all the best minds, in my opinion, from my particular niche. And I don't know if you've seen it on my page or anything,
No, I
but
wanted to
it's
ask about that because I saw the post on Merrick's Twitter, and you reposted Chris Williamson, who's a
Mhm.
friend of mine as well, and I saw that he is working with you guys, and I thought that was awesome. So is it kind of like a longevity clinic, or like what exactly are you offering?
So it's a preventative medicine platform. So what we do is it's all telemedicine, but I think the stigma nowadays around TRT clinics is unfortunately somewhat negative, but also justified because a lot of those clinics that exist are frankly just cover ups to prescribe testosterone to every guy they can or an array of different like longevity related compounds when honestly a lot of them are not necessarily longevity enhancing, and they essentially are like the common pill mill more or
Mhm.
less, but like with not like a opiate or something. It's like
Right.
hormone related. But for us, like we're very passionate about preventative medicine. It's what I make a lot of my content on. And this platform, basically, it's me connecting people to high quality doctors in the field of our niche specifically, which is hormone optimization, but also preventative medicine as a whole is what I'm most passionate about, which is preventing disease before you actually get there. So rather than waiting, and this is like the biggest hang up I have with the medical system, especially in Canada, is good luck getting a blood test done before you're literally having a very significant issue or getting to, some sort of cardiac assessment before you're literally having a heart attack. Like oftentimes they will wait until you are in a disease state, severely unhealthy, or something dramatic happens that justifies a test or an assessment of any sort, when you could otherwise look at things well beforehand and create like a well thought out plan to avoid ever getting there, enhance your quality of life to the greatest extent you can, and optimize your whole self essentially. So for us, we take a very broad spectrum approach to that, and we look at hormones, hematology, kidney health, metabolic parameters, thyroid health. Like all of these things come into play to assess: do you have any deficiencies, imbalances? Where are they? How could we correct them through lifestyle changes, supplementation if warranted, sleep hygiene enhancement, pharmacology if warranted? But the main bread and butter for us is the services and the education. So that's what I pride myself on, is people becoming as informed as they can throughout the process of working with us. And then not just chucking them on a medication, being like, oh, get on Ozempic because you're fat. Like, rather, we will look at everything and give you all of the tools in your tool belt to kind of like choose the lowest hanging fruit with the lowest risk profile before you go to like heavy hitting stuff. And it's only if it's warranted. So that is probably the business I'm most passionate about and what I try to educate about at scale.
So are most of your clients in the States, or are they kind of all like, are they global?
In the States right now, we are looking to expand into Canada, but there's a lot of rules and regulations around medical services. So it's not as easy as we would hope, because especially being Canadian myself, it seems so paradoxical that none of my businesses are stationed in Canada and I can't really serve Canadian patients, unfortunately. But hopefully in the near future, that will be the case, because that's like one of the main things that motivated me to start this to begin with, is trying to get my parents proactive screening to make sure my
Mm.
mom doesn't have a stroke like my grandma did, or getting my dad's hormone status assessed, or even checking my own stuff to make sure I don't have any genetic predispositions to fill in the blank, or that my lipid profile is in check so I don't end up with atherosclerosis when I'm, 50 plus years old. Like, these are things that if I was to if you are to be proactive about it from onset of adulthood, like, you can offset a significant amount of otherwise highly probable, death outcomes. So like cardiovascular disease is like a highly avoidable outcome, even though it's the most common killer of, like, above cancer, even significantly. Cardiovascular disease is going to kill most people and doesn't need to happen if you were on top of it from an early age and monitoring your blood pressure, your lipid profile, metabolic health. Like, it does not need to happen. So that's stuff that, my main motivation behind it ultimately.
I think that's beautiful. I was gonna ask what motivated you, and that it's
Yeah.
your parents, I think, is so great. Do they participate? Do they do the panels and they listen to your advice, or are they like a lot of parents are like,
Yeah.
I always see you as my 5-year-old kid, and I'm never gonna listen to you."
No, it's funny because no matter how much of a like expert you are in your field,
Mhm.
and no matter how much, it's funny because even before I started businesses, I would do consultations for individuals or whatever. Like, people would pay a fair amount of money to get my advice, but even my parents and family, for whatever reason, it's like, some people just have certain motivation to help themselves and some don't, and they take a good amount of advice, but I feel like I wish they would take more. And they,
Mhm.
oftentimes I'll say, read this, or, watch this video, and then, implement this. And then I find out, months later, they still haven't watched like a 10-minute video or something. But it's, they do the blood work. I literally send a phlebotomist to their house to make sure it gets done, and
Mhm.
trying to oversee as much as I can ultimately.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can only help so much.
Yeah.
So when you're doing these intakes, like these blood panels, if someone, let's say they're strapped and they're on a tight budget, are there basic things that you would look out for? Like, do you do a microbiome test? Is that kind of something that you add on later? Like, how significant is that to overall well-being? And then I wanted to ask some questions about hormones.
Yeah. For us, we have different panels that you can choose from that have been pre-selected by our team and overseen by myself as well, that I've audited. And the comprehensiveness varies depending on budget, of course, and you can get as granular as, I think we're one of the only platforms that you can actually make your own custom panel. So if you actually know what you want and don't want to be forced to spend $500 to get, like, for example, if we have a sensitive assay estradiol test and you're a woman or a low T guy or whatever, and you want to actually assess where you stand in an accurate manner, because the standard estradiol test is not very accurate. Oftentimes, a lot of these platforms will force you to buy like the comprehensive hormone package to get like a $600 panel that has it included. It's on merrickdiagnostics.com. You can add each individual biomarker separately if you actually knew what you wanted. And you could buy, like, I don't know, $50 of biomarkers that includes like your top 4 things that you want to check or something, which becomes especially valuable if you have got a really expensive panel and then you've kind of owned in on like 3 things that are suboptimal and you want to correct. You don't want to have to get the whole panel every single time to assess
Mhm.
it, longitudinally. So for us, we make it so that you can just add, oh, your vitamin D was deficient last test, add a supplement or get outside more or fill in the blank. and then just add a vitamin D to your cart and go test that for, $10 or something. That's what we try and facilitate. So it's the most cost effective we can make it. And we're always negotiating better prices with LabCorp and whatnot to try and get the best prices for our clients and whatnot. But as far as microbiome assessments, that is something that we are not specialized in. And frankly, I'm quite skeptical of the the interpretation of those oftentimes. Like I've definitely seen individuals have success by getting granular on what is, the balance of different strains in their gut microbiome and whatnot, and trying to balance them and whatnot. But it's oftentimes people who position themselves as experts in that field, they are just going off of a lot of anecdotes and experience through trial and tribulation, not necessarily literature too, which is valuable, of course, because if you just went by literature, you would have people telling you that diet doesn't heal you. So it's not something we specialize in, though. So if somebody had like a severe autoimmune issue that was caused by like crazy microbiome imbalance or something, we would probably still get diagnostics, because I think that's the most valuable thing, is getting a systemic overview of what's going on in all organ systems in your body through your blood. But in addition to that, we would at most probably be able to give broad spectrum recommendations on what we know seems to be helpful for correcting through, elimination diets, certain supportive pro and prebiotics. Like, we have all the knowledge of people who are self-educating ourselves too on how to go about optimizing things, but actually doing an assessment of a gut microbiome, I don't think we offer that right now. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that's not something we offer right now.
Yeah, it's something a lot of people are talking about, and I'm just, like, curious again how accurate some of those things are. So, there's this one, I don't know if you've heard of Viome, but this lady that was on Huberman highly recommended it, and I did it, my husband did it, and I can't eat anything. Like, the things that came back on it, it was like it basically said all vegetables were off of the table, like, everything was causing inflammation or not getting digested properly. So then they send you a customized probiotic, and then you're supposed to take that and then retest and retest until it can, quote, heal your gut.
See, this is the thing that's tough with this stuff, is because there's no way to fact check if it's correct or not. So it's a very lucrative business model, and they would never be incentivized to tell you, just self-experiment by putting a food in and taking it out and seeing what happens. And I think for people with autoimmune issues, ultimately that's probably the best thing you can do, is go on, okay, I shouldn't say the best thing because this isn't like medical advice or anything, but an elimination diet, and then slowly adding things back in and seeing where you have flare-ups. I can't imagine a better system than that, rather than somebody blindly telling you, well, clearly you can't eat anything and take my probiotic supplement. Like, I'm very hesitant to believe that that's based on sound science personally, but I could be wrong, but I'm also just hyper skeptical of that industry in general.
Yeah, I think we should be with like most things, right? Especially if people are selling things. I think that's also one of the things that you do so well is when you do like your reaction videos, especially to people that are chronic marketers. I think you can tell the authenticity of someone or what their agenda is. Like, everyone has an agenda, right? Some are just pure and some are more self-serving. And if you see someone that, does a rug pull on an NFT and is constantly creating a new product, and you just got to look into that, right? It's like, are they really passionate about decentralization and crypto? And then all of a sudden, like, these questionable beverages and whatever, like, I don't know. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know where their heart's
Yeah.
at.
Yeah, I have a hard time trusting anyone who sells, a JPEG that they knew was not really worth anything, and then tried to imply that it was a valuable investment for their massive audience. It's like, we all know who we're talking about right now.
Yeah.
It's just
Yeah.
I just have a hard time trusting their input on other products too, by extension of their credibility and ethics and moral compass on the other stuff that was, like, clearly position. And it also is just mind-boggling to me too, when these individuals are willing to sacrifice their brand image credibility long term. This is not the trade-off for $1,000,000 now for selling a stupid scammy thing. It's just like not worth it in the grand scheme of things. The long-term investment will be brutally net negative. So I just don't get it. Even from a business decision standpoint, the calculation doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, community
Yeah.
is everything. I think the creators that understand the value within that are the ones that are going to have longevity, and then there's people that are just gonna burn out really bright and fast, I think. We'll
Yeah.
see.
Yeah, I wonder if there's some of the entertainers in the space that are really popular, but it's contingent upon them doing bigger and better, more extravagant things to really like almost dilute the shitty things they do too. Because it's like
Mhm,
at a scale where it's almost like how much crazy stuff can I do to where it mutes out the bad. And overall it's just, people just see me as a celebrity, and that's, continues my career indefinitely. It's wild to me that some of these people have had enduring like decade plus successful runs where they're still maintaining like peak popularity, but we'll see.
Yeah, I think if you're, like, marketing after certain demographics, like, if everyone is always young and there's always younger people coming in that maybe have that naivete or they just don't know any better, and
It's
then
like,
there's
how
always
long can you appeal to a 10-year
I
old when you're like 30 plus? I just don't get it.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I see some of the examples for young men, and I'm like, "Oh god, there's so many better ones." Like, watch Lex Friedman, that's a great guy, you know what I mean? Like, you don't have to be outrageous, like, there are good men out there, you just gotta navigate to the channels. They're just maybe not as click-worthy.
Yeah, some of the stuff that's just designed for entertainment, it sucks because there's only, even though there is infinite amounts of more content coming out, there's still like a finite spend of attention that you can
Mhm,
actually allocate on a daily basis. So it's like, with the attention spans dwindling to like nothingness nowadays, it's very, I guess, understandable how people are conditioned to navigate to those pages that are otherwise not as good role models, because it's just the most flashy, entertaining,
mm,
quickly stimulating stuff that they can get a hold of. So I don't know.
mhm.
It is what it is.
I wanted to ask about there's this thing that there's this hormone replacement center doctor in town, and we met during COVID because he was, like, the only person in town that was providing actual treatment for anything, like, not just
Okay.
saying, "Drink water and you can't take horse tranquilizer," or whatever it is, like, he was
Yeah, yeah.
actually, like, providing you services. So we went there and, he does hormone therapy, and he was saying that he has this cocktail which gives you this thing that he terms fluffy balls. So he says that you can take tea and still it doesn't affect your fertility and it doesn't atrophy your testicles. And I don't know if this is something he made up or if you guys also provide fluffy balls to
No,
people.
doesn't ring a bell. Like, do you know what's in the, like, this is his own proprietary tea or
I think
something?
so, yeah. It's like tea with
Hmm.
some other stuff, and it's supposed to help combat the atrophy, and then he says that he hasn't seen it, negatively affect fertility in his usages.
Oh, so he is suggesting it concurrently with testosterone replacement to offset the testicular atrophy.
Mhm.
Huh. If I Googled it, would I be able to find it quick, or do you not know the name
I
other
don't
than fluffy
No, I
balls?
don't.
If I
No,
type in fluffy balls, what is there any chance it
I
comes
don't know if
up?
you wanna do that. I don't know if you wanna do that.
I just got a bunch of like literally fluffy balls, not
Yeah.
testicles. So yeah, not as helpful. Interesting. Yeah, there is ways to offset testicular atrophy and sustain fertility while you use testosterone replacement, but it's certainly not going to be through a over the counter supplements. Like, you are going to need to use, it's called HCG, human chorionic gonadotropin. It is like a, basically there's two hormones that get sent from your pituitary to your testes to signal testosterone production and spermatogenesis, and that is luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone. And these are the two same hormones that dictate female hormone production as well. So it's useful to understand how these work, but LH, luteinizing hormone, is what stimulates the testes to make testosterone. So HCG is basically like a mimetic of LH. So it's like structurally, it's like pretty much the same thing, and it interacts with the same Leydig cells in the testes. So you can manually tell your testes to make testosterone intratesticularly, even if you're using, when you use exogenous steroids or testosterone or anything anabolic, androgenic, you will tell your brain basically, I have enough testosterone and estrogen, so you don't need to make more. And then as a consequence of that, the signal stops going to your testes And that's what causes the atrophy. It's not like the steroids like go to your testes and shrink them or anything. It's your brain stops signaling to produce things there. And the lack of production leads to inactivity and atrophy because you're not, making the sperm, making the testosterone, etc. So this stuff, using HCG with testosterone, you can actually manually bypass that and create the synthetic signal to your testes telling it, keep making testosterone. So then you have natural testosterone being made in your testes as well as the exogenous source that you're using. Now, the only time, and you can use FSH on top of that, recombinant FSH, to get like the full spectrum of maintaining as high fertility levels as you can while you're on testosterone. The only downside of that is if you're somebody who literally has testicular failure, like I wouldn't necessarily make it the equivalent of a postmenopausal woman, but some men who actually need testosterone replacement, the reason they need it, and this is dependent on your diagnosis, but some of them, it's not that they have a lack of signal, it's that they literally can't respond to the signal. So if you can't respond to the signal, you are not going to have the capacity to make natural testosterone, which is why you're using it exogenously to begin with. So that is where you can't maintain fertility because you literally you could maintain it to some spectrum potentially, but you have dysfunctional, lower functioning testes than an average person. So that is where using this stuff concurrently with testosterone can maintain whatever level of fertility you're capable of essentially. But there's no over the counter supplement that's going to achieve the same outcome that I'm aware of personally.
So when men are doing TRT or HRT, eventually I guess common knowledge is that you kind of need it forever, whether you're cycling or not, but that you'll never be able to kind of reproduce that baseline again, like your natural baseline, because you weren't using it for so long. And then I heard you on a podcast and you were comparing birth control to like HRT for women, which I thought was so fascinating because it's never positioned like that. And you give it to minors, right? Most of the time they start when they're like 13, 14, 15 usually, and it's usually pitched for some bogus reasons, but it's not what I would call like ethical or even conscious consent, because they don't give you potential side effects, they don't give you the alternatives, they just give you the benefits of the one thing. And to me, that doesn't seem like an honest way or like an honest transaction with a layperson. Like I feel like there needs to be full disclosure, but there's not. So you give this medication to a minor and they're on it for over a decade. If it's similar to a man kind of being on T, is the consequence potentially the same? Like, is it kind of like disrupts the hormones potentially lifelong for the female, or is there a way to get back to a healthy place where you're making the hormones back internally?
Yeah, with men on TRT, because the preface of a man getting on TRT is in general, if they are actually a clinically viable candidate, like on paper and symptomatically, they actually need it to function, the likelihood that you would get back to some level of function after coming off that is supportive of high quality function at all is essentially impossible, because you wouldn't have got on it to begin with if you weren't subfunctional to begin with. So it's a bit of a disparity between if you needed it versus didn't when you got on it. Because for men, for women, when they get on birth control, they don't need it. Like, they don't need to take a replacement of hormones at 16 years old or whatever. For men getting on TRT at like 30 or 35 or whatever, there is definitely a disparity between some of them need it and some of them are just using it to optimize kind of thing. So individuals that really needed it, yeah, you could come off and potentially recover to whatever suboptimal natural amount you had previously. It's just even less likely because as you age, it's going to decline anyways. You were subfunctional when you started the TRT. So if you came off 10 years later, best case scenario is you recovered to some like lower amount than you had before you got on it to begin with, probably. If you were somebody who didn't need the TRT and you got on it, you could potentially restore function. It would just be a arduous recovery process, likely, because you have had, depending on the amount of exposure, like the duration of it, you have had lack of like the organ itself has not been functioning for this long. So recovering to baseline is difficult to expect. But this is again where nuance comes in, because if you're on HCG and FSH this whole time, maintaining testicular volume and function, your transition period to natural function, if you came off the TRT, might be a lot smoother than a guy who wasn't using that and has the most atrophied, shriveled testicles ever. Like, that's going to be a completely different process. So it's not that you can't recover. It just depends on the context in which, like, where you stand on that spectrum. For women getting on birth control at a young age who have otherwise like peaking hormones, they are basically suppressing themselves to a point where they are now reliant on a synthetic replacement of a synthetic estrogen and progestin rather than having their natural estradiol and progesterone being produced. And testosterone also gets, crushed into the ground too, unfortunately. So it absolutely could be the case that if they're on it for 10, 15, whatever years, and then they want to have a kid, that recovery process is probably not going to be the smoothest. Now, fortunately for women, recovering certain hormones, I wouldn't necessarily say it's like easier. That would be probably an incorrect statement to say, but their hormone levels are not like, I don't know, trying to get back to a peak testosterone level as a female might be a less arduous undertaking than a guy because they don't rely on it as much to function. Whereas, like, they do rely on testosterone, it's an important hormone, but they don't need to produce 600 nanogram per deciliter to feel good. And again, that number depends on the individual. They only need 1/10 of that to function the same. Like, a lot of women are just accustomed to functioning like castrated, essentially. I'm not saying that that's like an excuse for, staying on it or coming off and not having as hard of a recovery process. But in general, the delta of, I don't know, like hormones required to support a state that you could otherwise function on in an androgen environment, at least for women, is seemingly lower than men, to where maybe the recovery process isn't as dramatic for that. But certainly if they're coming off of hormones they needed to support any sort of estrogen functions, progesterone related functions, coming off of it, you're going to have some sort of period where it's clearing out of your system and you have to recover natural function, and probably won't feel great during that process. And how long or arduous that process is could be dependent on multiple factors like lifestyle quality, diet, sleep hygiene, etc. Because women who have poor lifestyle and diet, like, they may never recover. There's some women who have crushed libidos and then, they try and get off and it never went back to baseline ever. Like, that is an outcome that is certainly possible. So I would say in general, they typically, under the right circumstances of healthy supporting infrastructure of diet principles, etc., are likely to recover some level of natural function. The level to which they get, though, is going to be dependent on all those variables. And it certainly is more difficult because, like, we just discussed, you've been essentially neglecting certain organ systems and signaling cascades for a decade plus. And now your body has to recover that to baseline somehow when over half your life you have not had that functional. So yeah, I think it definitely does permanent, especially brain chemistry. I think it definitely can be impactful on a somewhat permanent basis, potentially for women too. If you are half your life, especially in your developing years, being exposed to like synthetic drugs to support your like brain development, and it's like you have an inadequate amount of bioidentical estradiol and progesterone, you're relying on the synthetic progestin, the synthetic ethinyl estradiol, your testosterone's in the toilet, it will certainly impact your brain health, neurological state, mental well-being, potentially mood volatility. Like, some women even have different preference of sexual, like their partner selection when they're on birth control versus not. So yeah, I think there's
pick up on the pheromones.
Yeah. So yeah, sorry this has been like a super long-winded answer. There's just so much nuance to it.
There is, and no one's talking about it. And when I saw that, I was like, this is maybe what's going on with me. Like, my testosterone just doesn't exist. Like, I pretty much have zero, and I've had zero for a while. I started taking testosterone right before I got pregnant with my second baby. So then I had to stop taking it because they're like, well, we definitely don't recommend this because there's not enough research. So I stopped doing that. I'm still breastfeeding, so I'm still not taking any testosterone. I'm exhausted all of the time. Like, I feel like shit, and I get my blood done all of the time and it doesn't budge. Like, the T is just not there. And I was on birth control for well over a decade. And I'm like, I'm curious if that did something to it and it's just not coming back because my lifestyle is better than most, 100%.
This is one of the things too where a lot of people are hesitant to get blood work when they're healthy and young, because why would I do it when I have no problems?
Mm-hmm.
I could not recommend more highly enough a baseline panel for anyone at as early of a matured age as possible. So, like, if I was to go back in time and save up money for something and I was 19 or 18 or something, it would absolutely be like a baseline panel, especially before all my exposure to anabolic steroids and the stuff I did when I was younger, because who knows what my baseline was relative to what it is now. Like, I don't even know how to compare and contrast that if something goes wrong compared to what is representative of my youngest, most like vibrant baseline. So
Mm-hmm.
especially, it's difficult for to tell at scale young girls getting on birth control, like, yeah, get a baseline hormone panel, but it's like, I think it's warranted personally, and it would
Mm-hmm.
be, I'm sure you'd be super interested to see what was your test before you got on a bunch of, hormone suppressing
I wish
compounds.
I had it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, because again, you would be able to see at least what your capacity was when were young and the most vibrant or whatever, and be able to compare and contrast to now. So, yeah. What is your test now? Just out of curiosity.
I was trying to look it up. I mean, when I say it doesn't exist, I feel like he was like, it's less than one. Like it was
Oh,
like
wow.
just not showing up. He's like, you probably feel like you're dead all the time. Like there's just not, you cannot even cultivate the energy. So every day I'm like super reliant on making sure I at least get like some sunlight and movement because that energizes me. And I live off of caffeine. Like I need it to function or I'm just not functioning. And I sleep amazing. Like I'm a professional sleeper. It's one thing I'm very proud of. I can go to bed, and I was doing one of those Aura rings for a while, and it wasn't serving me because it was consistent all the time. No matter what I did, I was sleeping 8 or 9 hours and solid, and I still felt like shit. So I'm like, it's not providing me any information that's actionable. So I'm like, it has to be the tea.
And do you have a regular menstrual period, or like
It's a little
is
bit long, and sometimes, like, I'll be, like, 2 weeks late or something that's not abnormal, but
and have you checked during periods of the cycle where like LH would be like what does your signaling look like? Have you had an LH and FSH analysis on your test, or is it just the testosterone?
I think it's probably just the testosterone, but I do this when I remember to do it. I do this app, it's called Mira, and you, like, pee on this stick every day, and it
Mhm.
measures that, and even that's crazy. So it's supposed to track when you ovulate, but mine, it'll like, a healthy ovulation, it's like a spike and then this dip, and then you ovulate. Mine just kind of looks like a heartbeat. So it's always like, "You're gonna ovulate tomorrow, you're gonna ovulate tomorrow." So even the app has no idea when I'm ovulating because it's just my hormones are all over the place.
Huh. Yeah, for women, it's tough because their proportion of testosterone production can come either more so from adrenal hormones
Mhm.
versus actual like gonadotropin signaling from the pituitary. So for men, it's like entirely dictated by their LH to their testes, essentially. But for women, because testosterone is like 1/10 the amount, a significant amount of their testosterone may come from adrenal steroid production. So like
Mhm.
DHEA and downstream to that testosterone and whatnot. So, have you ever had a DHEAS test done? It might be
No,
okay.
no,
It sounds
no.
like whoever is checking your hormones is not going uh, above and beyond the call of duty to check everything. So,
No, and I love him so much, and he's, like, trying like, he's very inspired by David Sinclair and Peter Attia and, like, love the guy to death, but he is, like, a business owner, and he is too I think, too caught up in the admin of what's going on right now that he's not able to just, like, function as the MD and, like, be able to kind of look at people with excitement and, like, figure out what's going on.
is there anything? So, you're on a bunch of caffeine, but other than
Yeah.
that, is there anything you're taking drug wise that is notable?
I take metformin, so
Okay.
I had PCOS. I haven't had cyst problems in forever, but I continued taking it just because some people suggest it's good for longevity, and then other people say, "Well, we don't know, but there's nothing adverse." But I take that 500 milligrams at night.
Okay. Do you find that helps your blood glucose control, or do you
I think so. I
track
feel
that?
better when I'm on it. Mhm.
Okay. Huh. Yeah, if you were into it, I would be happy to set you up with a female comprehensive panel through Merrick and just see where stuff is at and at least give you more,
100%.
yeah, could give you more biomarkers to kind of see, at least determining why it's low is like the first step.
Mhm.
Because it's kind of hard to correct something or dial something in if you have no idea what the precursors are doing to begin with. So is it a signaling from your brain issue? Is it an adrenal insufficiency? That could be determined through something like this. So hopefully give some insight and clarity on that. Cause it's there's a lot of women that, especially on the birth control, that get their libidos and quality of life, energy levels, etc., just like sapped because it's so dramatically suppressive on their hormone systems.
Yeah, and there's not a lot of information out there when it comes to HRT for women. Like some people will have the conversations, but it's still super vague. And it's like, well, cost benefit analysis. And some people are saying you really shouldn't take it until like 10 years before, or like maybe it's within 10 years of menopause. So then you have to wait for that. And it's like, well, what if you're in your 30s and you feel like shit? Like, so like you're saying I shouldn't go on T because that doesn't make sense. Because if it's not existent, like I feel like if I do a little bit, that's not going to do any damage. So I think there's a lot of women that are like, well, what do I do? Because I want to have sex with my husband or have sex and I want to feel energized and I want to feel youthful and have my skin glow and not get dry all of the time. And then, it's like, well, what are my options?
So when you tried testosterone periodically, right? You said, and then you came
Only
off.
I was on it for less than a month before I got pregnant, so I had to get off of it. It was a topical cream, so I was like doing like the wrist or behind the knee.
Did you notice anything?
No,
Okay. Yeah, you might have had to go with like a more
like a
direct
pellet.
administration. No, I wouldn't do that because then you're stuck with it for a while. Like you want to be able to manipulate your dose
Mhm.
and pivot quickly. You don't want like
Mhm.
a pellet that's like stuck in you, which again, it's not like you couldn't get it removed, but I mean, it's like the worst form of hormone therapy in my opinion. Like I
Oh,
would,
wow, really?
yeah. So like, oftentimes, at least patients of ours, they will do labia administration, which is like better assimilation through the like the skin barrier can be really difficult to get adequate absorption too through like wrists and legs and stuff. So it kind of depends on the individual, and especially if it's like they've dialed in the routine or not, because it's kind of hard to adhere to a regimen or use something that is more longer lasting without knowing if it's even going to be the thing you're going to stick with, like a pellet or an injection or whatever. These are things that are typically reserved more for individuals that know like what they're doing and what keeps them stable. So
Mhm.
oftentimes the topicals are best, but if you don't have adequate absorption, that's actually reflected on your blood work too. Like you would be able to tell if it
Mm.
got you into, if all of a sudden you were 40 nanogram per deciliter total test and before you were undetectable, then you would know, okay, it's getting absorbed properly. And is it dictating the effects or facilitating the effects that I'm actually trying to get out of it at that point? And then you can start to assess symptom relief, et cetera, et cetera. But it's kind of hard to do that when you don't even know if it's getting into your system. And obviously, a month is not the longest period of time to make like an informed assessment either. So, but either way, it definitely gives peace of mind knowing why something is happening and what to do to correct it. So, yeah, just let me know after we get off the call, and I'd be happy to set you up.
Yeah, for sure. No, you are a wealth of knowledge. This was absolutely incredible. I'd love to have you back on whenever you have availability because I have so many more things I want to ask and I just don't want to
Right
run
on.
into too much time. But before we head off, can you tell the listeners where they can follow you, find you, and then any projects you might be working on?
Yeah, so on any social media platform, you can find me, More Plates, More Dates, or you can check out MarekHealth.com. And we're also on social media at Marek Health on most of the platforms, I believe. And there we put out, I feel like high quality content on a regular basis about stuff like this that we just discussed. And we also feature some of our doctors on that content too, who regularly are putting out tidbits of knowledge and educational material to kind of get people as informed as they can about their health and preventative medicine. So, you can check those out if you guys are interested. And yeah, that's pretty much it.
Awesome. Well, yeah, thank you again.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
That's it for this week's episode of Chatting with Candice. But before you go, if you haven't left a 5-star review or it's been a while, please do so. And if you know anyone that would enjoy this content, please share it. It is the best way to grow a podcast is word of mouth and personal recommendations. So that was awesome. I hope you enjoyed the conversation and I'll see you next week. Bye, everybody.